bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio del Futuro de las Ideas, del podcast de ESA de ECPOL. Hoy es un episodio un tanto distinto porque va a ser en inglés, de modo que si escucháis el audio en nuestros canales habituales va a ser en inglés, pero tenemos también una versión en vídeo que podéis ver en el canal de ESA de YouTube o en la propia página web de ESA de ECPOL, donde hay subtítulos en castellano. Y es un episodio especial porque conversamos con Margrethe Vestager, vicepresidenta ejecutiva de la Comisión Europea y comisaria de competencia. Thank you very much for your time, Madam Vice President.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I got a bit of it, though my Spanish is really, really almost non-existent.
It was not very complicated. I would like, Vice President, to take a step back from what we are discussing today and ask you something that I'm not sure if it's very difficult or very simple, is that traditionally, we have thought on monopoly as business that have such a dominant position in the market that customers have to pay higher prices for what they buy. But I'd say this is not the case with the big tech monopolies. So in what sense do you think they are monopolies? And in what sense do you think they have a dominant position in the internet?
Well, we still pay for the services, even if we don't have to find our credit card or have to find a place to put in a note or a coin in our computer, because we pay with our data. Mm-hmm. And when we pay with our data, they get to know, so much about us. You wouldn't believe it. And because of that, they can sell advertising that works very well for those who do advertising, sometimes better than when you advertise on other platforms. Mm-hmm. So both for those who advertise and for us who pay with our data, there is a consequence when businesses become monopolies or de facto monopolies, having market shares of 95, 98%, as Google search would have it, in some of the European member states.
And do you think the judges who are judging the cases about the monopolies in the internet are understanding this difference about what a monopoly used to be and what it is now?
Yes, I think they do. And one of the reasons why I'm confident in this is that some of the basics, they are the same. Mm. Because a monopoly, a dominant position, when we, accuse them, find the evidence, think that we can prove that they had done something wrong, it is the same thing as what we have seen, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's about taking something that you can take because of your size, but that has no fair place in a fair marketplace.
I wanted to ask you about the fairness of the marketplace in the internet, because probably 2 decades ago or in the 1990s, we would have thought that the internet was the most open marketplace in the world. We expected even that there would be no government meddling with the internet. It wouldn't even be ruled by capitalism. It would be something entirely different. But we are seeing now that probably needs a regulation not that different from the real world. Do you think that it's still an open marketplace, that you can invest there and innovate freely as we expected it would be?
No, I don't think so. This is why regulation is needed. And it is very much a capitalistic place. And what has happened since the very start, when we had all these ideas that it would be something truly new, truly free, is that digital has increased its presence in our lives. During the pandemic, some people, they spent 8-10 hours a day online, working, shopping, staying in touch, exercising maybe, having fun, watching movies and series. But it was as if it sort of pressured out democracy in those many, many hours of our lives, that there was no democracy having a say about how things should actually work. And from these very early days, to having gigantic companies occupying so much of the space and basically deciding if another business, a smaller business, can be successful or not. Then, of course, you need democracy to come back, to reclaim that territory in our societal life, and to put in the rules that allows for this to be open. Because the paradox is, of course, that we can only have a free and open marketplace if it is regulated. And that, of course, is a paradox. But what we see these days is that it's a paradox proven to be true.
Why do you think it has taken so long, not for the European Union, which in most senses is a pioneer on the regulation of internet, but in other places, mostly the United States, why do you think politicians have taken so long to understand that it needed regulation? Was it because it was a cool place with young investors and young inventions, and it could help you to win elections, so you didn't want to mess with that? Or what do you think was the reason that we've taken so long to regulate it?
Well, I find that actually to be a very good question, because if you look at sort of US culture, you'd say this is about the individual. This is about the right to carry a gun. This is about your freedom of speech. This is about the right to do your best to succeed. And yet there are no privacy laws, no federal privacy laws. There is nothing that enables, the startup, the businesses that want to make it with a brilliant idea, with an amazing work ethics, and with funding from other places, that will make sure that they can make it if they have this good idea. So it's really strange. So I share your wonder. I think part of the reason is that the political dynamics of the US is very different from a European setup. And with these very, very delicate balances from majority and minority in the US legislative process, then, of course, the fact that there is so much more money in US politics, I think that also plays in.
Do you think there is a deep cultural reason about the understanding of life, business, and information, in which the Americans stress more the freedom and Europeans put more stress on protection of the user, for example, or I wouldn't say limitation of the speech, but we tend to put more stress in that? Do you think it's part of the reason too?
Well, I don't see much difference here, because, for instance, what we are doing in the agreement of the Digital Services Act is to say that if something is taken down and you disagree, well, you should have a direct access to say, I disagree. I want my expression, I want my post, I want my video back up again. So we are actually increasing your rights to get your things back up if they are not illegal. And at the same time, everyone is much better protected against what is illegal. Because we have been discussing for decades and taking decisions as to what should be illegal. Excitement to terrorism, to violence, hate speech. And I think it's quite balanced to say, on the one hand side, we are all protected from what we have agreed is illegal. But in the gray zone, you have rights to say, well, this may hurt you. You may disagree with me, but it's my right to say so. And that exact right we protect in a very sort of practical manner.
This is part of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which are going to be passed by the European Union soon, or are being in the process. There are very interesting things in this act. I would like to ask you, in general terms, what is the general goal? What is your vision of what the ruling of technology should be in the long term?
Well, what gets us up in the morning and keeps us, focused is something quite fundamental, that it should be the citizen who's empowered. We should be the ones to use technology, not for technology to use us. And that is why it's so important that the market is open, that it's your idea, it's your work ethic, it's your funding that decides if you're successful or not some other giant company that basically keeps the gate to the market. And this is why it's so important that we can express ourselves freely, while at the same time agreeing that there are actually things that keeps our society together. And one of those things is that we have agreed that we don't want people to be recruited for terrorism. We don't want minorities to be the victims of hate. And these things are quite fundamental. Of course, it's tricky and complicated technical legislation, but what we want to achieve is for the citizen to be empowered.
And do you think we can make these big platforms responsible for everything that is published in their webs, in their platforms? Do you think we can do that?
Well, they are not supposed to, do it by themselves. Mm-hmm. We have introduced what we call trusted flaggers. It can be academics, it can be, NGOs with a long-standing experience in finding things that are illegal, who can put a flag in it and say this is actually not legal, it should be taken down. Mm. But I think the fundamental thing here is that there's no ban of success in Europe. You're more than welcome to be successful. You're more than welcome to grow and also to grow into a powerful market position. But what comes with power is responsibility. And I think it's completely justified to expect that giant platforms, giant businesses with a really dominance in that marketplace, that they take upon them the responsibility that comes with that kind of power.
This is something that you probably have heard from a lot of American politicians or American businessmen and businesswomen. Most of these companies, or all of them, are American. Mm-hmm. Do you think that, or how would you answer to the question of, is it not a kind of protectionism from the European Union or from Europe? Are we not trying to deny them, I know this is not the right word, but are we trying to deny them the success in Europe because we would like to have our own businesses, our own big platforms?
Well, actually, maybe the paradox would be that some of these really successful businesses, that when they live up to this legislation, that people will trust their services more. Mm-hmm. Because regulating technology is also creating trust in how it will actually work. It may be that some of the things that I have found in the competition cases that I have had that are illegal, that will not happen anymore, which means that other businesses get a fair chance. But Europe is still a very attractive place to do business. And I think that there may be a couple of European businesses also in scope, maybe a couple of Chinese businesses also in scope of this legislation for an enhanced responsibility to make sure that it actually works for people.
Maybe what we are facing now is small against what might be the metaverse. Mm-hmm. Do you think we should start thinking about that now that it's beginning to exist, or we have enough work to do with what already exists?
Well, this is why, for me, the timing of sort of democracy coming back is so important. Because now we have, our leaders in the European Council, our representatives in the European Parliament, our democracy is coming back. And also, having a say in the digital part of our world. And the two are so integrated, so it was kind of crazy that democracy had the biggest say in anything physical, old school. So the timing, to come back in is really good because everything digital develops right now. And to some degree, we have the metaverse. I think a lot of people who are really engaged in gaming, mm-hmm. They have this sense that they're in a world when they're in their gaming chair in front of their, really powerful computer with their different gadgets. This is what is the metaverse, mm-hmm. that you feel that you can be somewhere else. But when you look at, for instance, what may be a virtual mall, where you do your shopping, where you can have your measurement taken so you know that the clothes will fit you perfectly. Here, these will be businesses like any other brick and mortar business in a physical mall. So to some degree, we have a lot of sort of the consumer protection that we would want to have, and it will apply equally also in the metaverse.
The Commission has proposed a declaration of digital rights and principles. Maybe you have already answered the question, but do you think of those digital rights and principles very different from the real ones or the ones we've been using in the real world?
Well, I think it's kind of a translation to say, well, the things that we know in the physical world, we would want that also in the digital world. And to sort of play it out in a language that can be understood, In most countries you have a right to education. So we'd also say you also have a right to digital education. You have a right to know how these things work. And one of the things I'm really happy about is that it's not just a declaration, it's not just a piece of paper. Because behind every principle, behind every right, legislation is already established. So it's not an empty shell that needs to be filled in. It is actually a full body of democracy that can be put into effect by people knowing much more about what is actually my rights. Because it's really difficult to enforce your rights if you don't even know that you have them.
Elon Musk has bought or is going to buy Twitter. As you know, he said that it had a problem with free speech, that one of the things that he wanted to do with Twitter was to enhance free speech. Do you think we can do that without risking what we have seen that is a great danger for democracies, like fake news, disinformation? We are seeing this with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Where is the right equilibrium between free speech and the right to not be disinformed?
Well, as said, the Digital Services Act actually sort of reinforces this balance, gives you rights if you feel that your free speech is being destroyed or undermined. Then you have rights to say, well, it is my right to say so, and as long as it's legal, you have your right to say so. At the same time, if you want to do business in Europe, you should live up to this. But it's not only sort of what is in the law. One of the things I really have appreciated in what Twitter has developed over the last couple of years are sort of different features to prevent misinformation to spread. If you want to pass on an article, there would be sort of a message to you. Do you want to read the article first? I think that's a really good reminder that maybe you should pause a bit, and instead of just sort of sending something on where you are, engaged in the headline, maybe you should read it first before you make everyone else see it. I think that is good. And I do hope that will be maintained, because these are things that we have developed with every big platform in the code of conduct in order to make sure that when people see something about a vaccine that is posted by someone who may know very little about vaccines, there's actually sort of a reference. You can go here if you want official information about vaccines. So it's not sort of saying this cannot be shown or this is wrong, but this is the other side. This is the official side of this story.
Some analysts say that, or think that countries like China or like Russia would like to have sovereign internets, national internets, which are more or less independent from the rest of the internet. In Russia, maybe it's happening something like that in the last months. Do you fear that the internet might stop being a universal platform or a universal tool to become like a national platform, or in the case of Europe, a European platform, less connected with the rest of the world?
Well, I think we will have sort of two levels that are interwoven at the same time. You will have a global internet. That is what we're working for, decentralized, ungovernable, to enable people to get in touch, to find things, to do things. And at the same time, for some of the people doing business on this internet, there will be, a stronger hand to say, well, for instance, if you want to do business in Europe, you need to register in Europe, and you need to follow the European rule book. But this is about services being provided. We would also expect that if you were in Europe and you wanted to do, construction services, you would also need to have an address. You would also need to have, legal representation. You would need to have someone that people could come to if there was a problem with the construction services that you provided. So I think it's really important not to mistake sort of the services that are being provided with the internet as such. And that can be really tricky because in some parts of the world, for instance, there was no internet before Facebook. Mm-hmm. So people, they mix the two completely, saying, well, when I want to get in touch with other people, Facebook is what I do. So I think it's really, really important to remind ourselves that it's of universal value to have this decentralized possibility to connect. And then I think we can regulate the services as we would regulate businesses in the real world. We regulate financial services, telcos, energy services. There's nothing strange about it. On the contrary, actually, now it has been the digital services providers that has been in a strange world, and now the rest of the world catches up with that.
In that sense, one of the things that the Digital Markets Act wants to do is make the great gatekeepers like Google, Facebook, or Twitter to make compatible their messaging services, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
If you are a messaging service, can be a startup, can be a bigger one, then you can ask for the messaging services, for instance, of Facebook, to be interoperable with your service, so that not everyone will have to migrate to your service before it can get volume, but that your service actually also can get to people that remains on the other service, even though you start to have some customers. So the idea is that newcomers will have a better chance of actually getting to people, like emails, for instance. Here we don't consider for a second that it could be a problem that I have one service
Gmail
provider.
Hotmail or
we don't think, we say, oh, that would be really strange if I could only write to someone who had Hotmail as well. And you could only write to someone who had Gmail. Of course we can write to one another. So it's the same kind of idea also for social services, social media, because most people, they now use social media to connect with one another, because to some degree it takes the place of an email.
And one last question about the internet. We've been talking a lot about that some of these monopolies are built by killer acquisitions. They buy their competing businesses. But in fact, a lot of startups are created with the goal of being sold to one of those businesses. Are you afraid that this regulation might stifle competition and innovation, mostly innovation?
No, I don't think so. Of course, I respect that some businesses, they are built to be sold. But some businesses, they are also, built to scale up. And the thing is that if you want some people to invest in you, well, your investor would want to know, how do you get to market? How do you get to your customers? Is it because of your great idea and your work ethics and the other funding that you get? Or is it actually someone else who decides? And as things are now, well, there is someone keeping the gate to the market. There's someone else deciding. So I consider this legislation to be pro-innovation, because it's more likely that it will be more interesting for investors to invest in smaller businesses, because it depends on the business and not on the gatekeeper whether you have a chance of success or not.
We're talking a lot lately about strategic autonomy. We're talking about geopolitics more than we used to. And usually I'd say that the European Union looks at these realities, looks for multilateral ways to face these realities. But we don't know if it will be possible in the long term to do that. As China rises, as we don't know who the next president of the United States will be. Let me say it that way, are we serious trying to achieve that strategic economy? And I wanted to ask you about energy, especially because this is an important issue in Spain, and as we know, yesterday you talked to the Minister of Energy in Spain. I would like to talk about that strategic autonomy, and especially in the energy field.
We are working for Europe to have a bigger say on this planet, for Europe to have a bigger footprint, and for us to be able to take our own decisions. The paradox here is that is only possible when we are connected to the rest of the world. because in batteries you find, rare earth minerals, materials that we don't have in Europe. So if we want to electrify cars and buses, well, we need to import material from the outer world. If we want to be effective in fighting climate change, well, European solutions in terms of better integrated electricity grids, wind power, all these solutions developed in Europe, they need to travel the world in order for climate change, fighting climate change to pick up in speed. So there are so many things that we cannot do on our own. We can also not be self-sufficient in semiconductors. We need to source some semiconductors from other parts of the world and the raw material to build semiconductors from other parts of the world as well. But that doesn't change the fact that we should be able to do more ourselves. And this is why I would call it sort of an open strategic autonomy, doing more ourselves, but realizing that we would want to work with other countries around this planet in order to make it happen. And especially now, when we want to get independent from Russian fossil fuels, this, of course, is crucial. Because take gas. There's no way that we can just turn off gas in general from one day to the next. So we need, of course, to find other sources to get the gas. But many more sources instead of just a new dependency. So it was really good that we got an agreement with the Americans, starting with 15 BCM, which is what gas is measured in, increasing to 50 BCM over the coming years. We're talking with Nigeria for them to deliver. We're talking about Qatar for them to deliver. And I think that's a good illustration of the fact that when we want to become more independent with the Russians, we don't create new dependencies, but of course, we're still the customers of businesses outside of Europe.
How do you think this will affect the green transition? Will it make it faster or will it make it slower?
I think sort of the net effect will be much faster. Because even if someone was skeptical towards fighting climate change, I think they now see that there is so much security policy in relying on renewables. Because no one can take the sun away. No one can stop the wind. And if we are good at integrating our energy grids, then member states can help each other. Because what is a really calm day in one part of the Union often is a really windy day in another part of the Union. So I think it will accelerate. But of course, the paradox is that when you go from pipeline LNG to pipeline gas to LNG gas, the footprint of LNG is bigger than pipeline gas because in order to transport it, you need to make it liquid. And these are really advanced vessels. They cool it down to minus 162. And that, of course, in itself take energy, which is why, of course, the footprint of LNG, sort of liquefied gas, is bigger than pipeline gas. So, of course, at a very short-term basis, there will be an effect. But since we then accelerate the build-up of renewables, we, of course, think that we can offset that.
Do we need to be more interventionists to do that, to create that open strategic autonomy? Do we need to change the rules to invest in industrial policies, to change the state aid for businesses rules?
I think the important thing is to be willing to act if the market does not deliver. And here we don't have to change the rules. We have rules already that we can use in these specific circumstances. For instance, we consider it sort of a market failure that we don't have, large-scale production of semiconductors in Europe. So we can sort of open a window and say, for projects within this window of time, we can approve quite substantial aids directly on the treaty to say, well, we don't have it, we would want to have it, and the market will not deliver this to us, So we will come in with aid to make this happen. And here the treaty is very sort of future-proof. So we don't need a long process of changing rules or new rules. We can use the ones we have already.
It's been said that Brussels rules the world in the sense that everybody wants to be in the European market, so everybody wants to comply with the regulation in the European Union. Do you think this is, like the sanctions, a new form of soft power or even hard power for the European Union?
I think it's a kind of hard power, because what we achieve is something that is in very strong demand. That you as a consumer can trust the market, that you actually get good products that are safe. That as someone who uses energy, that be a business or a private consumer, that you actually can see, okay, I'm in my consumption, I'm part of fighting climate change. And since we have both, now we're at war, or there is the Russian war in Ukraine, and at the same time we need to deal with digitization, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. You know, the European answer to that is a mixture of regulation and investment. And that, I think, is really attractive because it has allowed us to gain quite a lot of speed in managing these crises that we are dealing with.
Do you think that this crisis, and I'm talking not only about Russia or China, but also about fake news or some market failures, are a real threat to liberalism? Do you think that these are particularly bad times for liberalism, not only because of populism, which exists and it's there and it's probably structural, but do you think there's something we have been doing wrong or that we have not understood that makes a real threat for liberalism?
For me, the fundamentals of liberalism and liberal democracy is the equality of individuals. That every one of us is respected with our integrity in our full right to be here. Full stop, no but. That is what it's built on. That your rights are the same as mine, we're equals, no matter what else defines us. And when people get the suspicion that this is not the case, because, you know, if you get fired from a business, well, eventually you'll have a new job and be able to provide for yourself in the best of cases. But if you have a feeling that you're being fired from your society, then where do you go? And I think the best thing that we can do for liberal democracy is to make sure that people see that this fundamental, the respect of themselves and their integrity, that this is something that is shown in everyday politics, in how things are created, translated into solutions, that they are counted in. And sometimes I fear that quite a lot of people feel forgotten, as if they don't matter, as if they're not counted in. And I think that is one of the worst positions that you can be in as a human being, because it's so fundamental that other people count on you.
And do you think this is because our markets are not fair, or there is something more deep or more cultural in that?
I think it's a lot of different things at the same time. I think market concentration can have this effect, because then consumer power thins out. Then the business don't have to respect you. They can be that they don't care about your rights. So market concentration can be one of these things. It can be if sort of living opportunities between rural areas and urban areas is not balanced. If, for instance, if it's only a priority that people in urban areas can be connected to the internet with high speed, but no one in the countryside get the same options. If there are huge differences in access to education and health, it can be done in so many different ways. You don't have to have a university and a hospital in every village, but you can make sure that there is equal access. that the quality of services that you have access to, that your ability to build a business based on, for instance, access to infrastructure, digital infrastructure, education, that people see, I'm part of this. This is also me. I am part of building this country. That, if you start doubting that, then of course you also doubt the fundamentals that is building our democracies.
And one last question. Some people think that these great divides are in part because of technology. Mm-hmm. Some think that part of this great divide is because of globalization. Mm-hmm. Do you think we can convince a lot of people that we can do digitalization or we can do globalization in a way that does not create this great divide between what some people call the elites and the rest of the society?
We need, I think, to act fast. Because if first you have this doubt, I'm not counted in. If then, social media sort of increases that doubt, so that what starts as doubt then becomes frustration, then becomes anger, because you're being told all the time, it's not a doubt, you're right, they don't like you, they don't want you, I want you, I like you, come with me to this fringe, to this special place. Social media can play that very negative role. So instead of saying, you have a doubt, let's talk about it and figure out if you're right, and if you're right, then figure out what can we do about it. Then social media can increase polarization. And the second thing is that we are working on sort of retiring the old sort of thought of globalization, because it has to some degree built on, if I may be very straightforward, greed. Mm-hmm. That you could produce in places where the salaries were not that high, where the environmental legislation was not that strict, where you took risks, security risks, on behalf of everyone else. And when trade deals are made these days, you look at working conditions, you look at environmental conditions, sort of ILO conventions, having a say on the rainforest for that not to keep deteriorating. So trying to create a new form of globalization. Part of that, of course, you will have to pay more, mm-hmm. in cents, euro cents, but then you don't pay anymore with accepting bad working conditions or deterioration of our environments or on the climate. I think that we can change this way of working, because I still believe in a connected world. But only if we can renew it. Because otherwise that doubt in the citizen, I'm not counted in, will of course also translate into, let's just make a closed garden, a walled garden, a small community where we don't want to deal with anyone else.
Madam Vice President, thank you very much for your time and your answers. It's been a pleasure.
It has been, so inspiring. I'm so happy that we can have these kind of discussions, that it's not just this day, this week, this month, but also looking a bit ahead. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos. Estaremos en el próximo episodio del Futuro de las Ideas de SADC Paul. Muchas gracias.